Have you ever felt so tired of life that you couldn't even pray anymore? Have you ever stared up at the sky in silence, unable to say a word, just waiting for something anything? Maybe this has happened to you and you didn't even realize it, or maybe you're experiencing exactly this right now. What you're about to hear today is more than a story. It's a sign. What if it happened to you? She had no strength left, no faith, no will to continue. It was dawn when something invisible touched that woman's dark room, something that cannot be explained with ordinary words, but that somehow made the impossible happen. A silent presence, yet so real that it changed everything, without needing to say anything. The ending may seem impossible, but it happened. Stay with me until the end, because the last detail of this story is the most unbelievable. This woman, who could have been your neighbor, your sister, or even you, had lost everything that kept her going. Alone, after so many disappointments, with her heart in pieces and her eyes dry from crying, she no longer asked for miracles or signs. She had grown accustomed to the silence. Until that night, the silence was broken by something that didn't come from earth. Do you believe angels exist? Perhaps the idea seems distant or even fanciful. But what about when something inexplicable happens? When we feel a force that isn't our own lifting us up, when at rock bottom, something touches us and gives us exactly what we need to keep going. Is this just a coincidence, or a sign? What you're about to discover may surprise you, because this story, despite beginning like so many others, a woman, broken by life, without hope, ends with a sign that not even science can explain. There's an invisible presence at work behind the scenes of this story, and it manifests itself. Just when all seems lost, you will never ignore these signs again after this. As you listen, think, what if this were you? Would you recognize the presence of an angel, or would it go unnoticed, as so often happens? Have you ever felt like something was protecting you, without explanation? Comment if you've experienced something like this. You're not alone. This story is real, and more than that, it carries a silent power, the kind that makes us look within and remember that we're not always as alone as we think. Maybe you're here watching this video for a greater reason. Maybe today is your sign. Stay until the end, because the way it all happened will make you rethink what it truly means to be protected. It will make you feel something you might not be able to explain, but you'll understand perfectly. Because deep down, everyone has needed an invisible miracle, and that's exactly what she got that night. Not a direct answer, not an audible voice, but a force that pierced the silence, as if an invisible hand had grabbed hers, just as everything seemed to be falling apart. And just when she thought no one cared, something pulled her up. If you've ever felt something similar, as if a presence were there, even without you seeing it, tell me in the comments. It could be a strange dream that strengthened you, a sense of protection, a peace that came from nowhere. Your story could touch someone today, maybe someone who's feeling exactly the way she did that morning. This channel exists because there are people like you feeling, awakening, believing. So, if this spoke to you, like the video and show that you're not alone. Every comment you leave here carries energy, and that's what keeps this space alive. And when you subscribe, this message reaches more hearts, people who might need to read exactly what you have to say. Your presence here matters a lot, because when you participate, you transform this channel into more than just a video. You transform it into a haven for those who believe in the invisible, the inexplicable. If you're one of those, show me I'm not just talking. Like, comment, subscribe, and stay with me, because what comes next is even stronger. There are things we can't explain with words, but we feel them in our bodies, in the air, in the silence. And that's where this story begins. A true story of a woman who had lost not only her faith, but also her very identity. She was no longer who she used to be. The joy she once had, the strength that once moved her steps, all seemed to have been ripped away from her over time, as if life had emptied every part of her being. And the hardest part, she didn't know how to find her way back. For a long time, she tried to resist. She relied on motivational phrases, advice from friends, videos, even those promises we make to ourselves in the dark. It will pass, but it didn't. The pain was constant, the emptiness only grew, and one day, she simply stopped trying. She woke up and went back to sleep on autopilot, as if she'd forgotten the reason for everything. She no longer prayed. She no longer cried. She no longer asked God for anything because, deep down, she thought he had given up on her too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there are people who live in exactly this state and don't even realize it. The pain itself, the lack of meaning, disguises itself as routine. And so, little by little, the soul fades away silently. And the most dangerous thing is that, from the outside, everything seems normal. But behind the scenes, inside, the decline is silent and brutal. That night, nothing seemed different. Same bed, same silence, same solitude. But something moved on. Outside, but inside her, a soundless whisper, a sensation that sent goosebumps through her skin without any wind. It was as if a presence had entered the room, without a door, without a window. And strange as it may seem, she didn't feel afraid. She felt peace. For the first time in a long time, she felt she wasn't alone. And here comes a point that many overlook. Not every sign of the divine comes with a bright light or a trumpet blast. Sometimes it comes in the form of presence. A sense that you're being watched with love, that there's something or someone who knows exactly how you are, even when no one else does. And it's in this invisible space that angels act when reason no longer responds, and the heart only wants rest. The hidden truth is that many people have been touched by this energy and haven't even realized it. Because the mind seeks logic, but the spirit understands the invisible, and it was her spirit that realized it first. At that moment, she didn't see wings. She didn't hear a voice with a celestial accent, but she felt as if something was saying, "You still have value." And that phrase, even unspoken, lifted her out of bed. Not with her feet, but inside. It's curious to think how a single night can change an entire journey. The transformation wasn't instantaneous like in the movies, but it was real. And sometimes the most powerful of miracles is the one that doesn't change the scenery, but changes you. And that's what happened. The impact was internal. The pain was still there, but it was no longer the only thing pulsing. She had something new inside her. Will, the desire to try one more day, the desire to breathe without guilt, the desire to look up without looking away. And with this change, everything began to reorganize itself, not from the outside in, but from the inside out. And this says a lot about how the spiritual works between the lines. In the details no one sees, in the small decisions we make when no one is looking. There's a power beyond your control, and when you reach your limit, that's when it manifests itself. Some call it faith, others call it an angel, others don't even know how to name it. But what really matters is recognizing when something greater is at work. And if you've ever felt like someone invisible helped you, then perhaps you've been touched to heaven without knowing it. Now I want to shed even more light on this. Because often, what seems like the end is just the point where the invisible begins to act more intensely. Sometimes, it's in exhaustion that portals open. And it was there, at rock bottom, that this woman found what she didn't even know still existed within her, a spark of light. She didn't tell anyone. How could she explain it? Who would believe her? But from that moment on, she knew something had changed. And that was enough. Because the greatest certainty isn't the one others understand, it's the one that burns inside you, even in silence. What does this evoke in you? Tell me in the comments. She wasn't famous. She had no followers, no titles, no spotlight on her story. She was an ordinary woman, the kind who goes unnoticed in the rush of the world, but who carries on her shoulders much more than she should. Her name, that doesn't matter now. Let's call her Grace. Because even without realizing it, it was Grace that she needed most. And that was exactly what found her. Grace was the kind of woman who got up early, even without much sleep. She took care of the house, the kids, the bills, but she couldn't take care of herself anymore. There was an invisible weariness that silently followed her, that exhaustion that couldn't be resolved with rest, because the weariness was in her soul. With each new morning, she felt further from who she once was and closer to a void that seemed endless. It had been a while since she'd prayed, not for lack of faith, but for lack of strength. And this is something many people don't understand. Sometimes, a person believes, but is so hurt they can no longer speak. The words get stuck. Prayer becomes just a loose thought, a sigh in the midst of pain. This is how Grace has grown accustomed to dealing with everything, in silence. Now I want to delve even deeper into this point. Because there's a kind of suffering that's silent, yet destructive. A weariness that doesn't scream, but consumes. It's as if you're slowly losing yourself, while pretending everything's fine. Grace knew how to smile at others. She knew how to be strong in front of her children. But when the door closed and the world fell silent, she just wanted to disappear for a while. Not out of cowardice, but out of exhaustion. And the most striking thing is that no one saw it. She fulfilled all her obligations. She paid the bills. She answered messages. She went to the grocery store. She did everything a normal person would do. But inside, what existed was a brutal disconnect with her own essence. The spirituality that once sustained her now seemed distant. God seemed absent. And the days just passed. She had a history of faith. He had felt the divine presence, had experienced miracles in other phases of his life, but that seemed like a distant memory, as if it had happened to someone else. Grace vaguely remembered what it felt like to have hope, but that memory hurt more than it comforted, because knowing what light is and living in darkness is one of the most difficult feelings there is. There were times when she looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself, not because of her appearance, but because of the lack of sparkle. In her eyes, what had once been their strength, faith was now a hollow reflection. And yet, she continued. Not because she wanted to, but because she saw no alternative. It was a kind of emotional survival, where each day was an invisible struggle not to fall apart. Grace never told anyone how she really felt. She didn't want to worry or appear weak. It was easier to smile and say everything was fine. But inside, she had given up many times, yet she kept getting back up. And this is something many people experience. The paradox of being broken on the inside and functioning on the outside. A kind of silent war that no one sees. And here's an important point. Just because someone doesn't show they're in crisis doesn't mean they're at peace. Many people are silently crying out for help, just like Grace was. And it was in this state, at this breaking point, that something completely out of the ordinary began to happen. Not spectacularly, but subtly, as if the invisible were just waiting for the right moment to manifest itself. She began to notice signs, small details, things that made no rational sense but that moved her in a different way. A thought that came out of nowhere and brought comfort. A song playing on the radio with a message that seemed made just for her. A dream that left her feeling like someone had been there. And, little by little, that began to make its way inside her. It wasn't an overnight change, but it was an internal shift. Something was reorganizing behind the scenes. And the curious thing is that, even without understanding, she began to allow it. Allow herself to feel. Allow herself to believe again. It was as if a new mindset was being built based not on logic, but on intuition. That part of the soul that recognizes truth even without proof. Now I want to expand this perspective even further, because what happened to Grace isn't unique to her. There are moments in life when all we have is the urge to keep going, even without knowing where we're going. And it's precisely in this state that the spiritual world comes closer. When the ego falls silent, the soul listens. When resistance gives way, grace enters. Grace didn't see visions, nor did she hear trumpets. But she reconnected with something many forget, silent faith. The faith that doesn't rely on pretty words, but is expressed in simple gestures like getting out of bed even when you don't feel like it, like looking up to the sky and silently saying, "Help me." And sometimes, this whisper of the soul is all the invisible needs to act. If this touched your heart, right, I felt that too. She didn't tell anyone when everything started to fall apart. The truth is, sometimes collapse doesn't come loudly, it comes silently, in small, daily fractures that only the person feels. In Grace's case, it was as if the world had stopped hearing her voice. People were still around. The clock kept ticking, but inside her, a kind of implosion began to happen. And she didn't even notice it at first, but she began to lose her spark without realizing it. First, she stopped doing the things she loved. Then, she lost her appetite. Her sleep became light, interrupted by relentless thoughts. Every day, the fatigue grew deeper, heavier, and worst of all, no one saw it. She was always there, working, delivering, smiling, in photos. But there was a hole inside her growing stronger, an absence that consumed her silently. Now I want to delve even deeper into this. Because when someone loses connection with their own sense of self, everything starts to get jumbled. Emotions become noise. Memories take on a strange weight. The future ceases to be a possible place. Grace lived on autopilot, but deep down, she no longer made plans. She had lost the ability to imagine a different scenario. It wasn't drama, it was soul exhaustion. There was a specific moment that stuck with her. It was an ordinary day, an ordinary late afternoon. But it was then that the pain hit her hardest. She was alone at home, sitting on the bedroom floor, staring into space. The sound of the world outside continued, horns honking, voices, life going on. And there she was, completely disconnected. That's when the thought struck her, that startled her. What if I just disappeared? Would anyone really notice? These thoughts don't arise out of nowhere. They stem from a silent accumulation of frustrations, undigested losses, emotional abandonment, and invisible pressures. Grace had been strong for too long. She had held the world in her hands for years. But now, her hands were empty, her strength drained, and in the midst of it all, she could no longer see a way out. There was a constant feeling of inadequacy, as if she were living a life that wasn't hers. As if she were trapped in a script she didn't write. Her past decisions all seemed wrong. The present hurt, the future frightened. And what hurt even more was looking inside and no longer finding that woman who once believed, who dreamed, who thrived on simple things. No one had abandoned her physically, but she felt emotionally abandoned, as if she were no longer seen, as if her pain were invisible even to God. And that was exactly the thought that crossed her mind that night. Has he forgotten me too? This kind of doubt arises when the heart is already broken. It's not a lack of faith. It's an excess of pain, and when you combine pain with loneliness, the ground becomes fertile for dangerous thoughts. And it was exactly there, at that point, that something almost irreversible could have happened. Grace looked at herself and felt worthless. She looked at the world and saw no place. She looked at the sky and felt no response. She was in free fall, and no one noticed. Because internal falls make no noise. They alert no one. Only the soul knows it's falling. Now, I want to expand this scenario to something many people experience without naming it. The loss of spiritual identity. When you stop recognizing yourself, not only as an individual, but as an essence. And then comes the anguish. Who am I now? A simple yet devastating question. Grace asked herself this question as she looked at her own reflection, and, for the first time, found no answer within herself. It was as if everything had been ripped away, her light, her voice, her connection to the divine. It's at this point that the journey ceases to be about external survival and becomes about internal rescue. Because her body was there, but her soul needed help, and it wasn't something that could be solved with pretty phrases or ready-made advice. What she needed was something that touched her in a place so deep that even she couldn't describe it. Something that transcended logic. Something that brought a kind of healing that can't be bought, can't be asked for, only received. And it's curious how life pushes us to this point without warning. A sequence of silent losses, bonds that break, situations that spiral out of control, until, at a certain point, everything collapses, and all that's left is emptiness. An emptiness so real it physically hurts. Grace felt this pain in her chest like a weight that would never lift, and at the same time, it was as if the world expected her to be okay, as if it were wrong to say, "I can't do this anymore." And that's where many dangerous decisions are made. Not out of weakness, but out of desperation. Grace considered giving up, and when I say giving up, you know what I mean. It wasn't just the routine, the work, the commitments. It was everything. Her existence, her very presence. It was as if she couldn't find any meaning left to carry on, and it was at that exact point, in that moment of freefall, that something completely beyond her control began to manifest. Not as a direct response, but as a presence that began to fill the empty spaces. Comment here. This message was for me. Grace had once been a woman of prayer, one of those who kneels with conviction, who speaks to God as if speaking to someone very close. She had faith, or, at least she had, for a long time. She knew what it was like to feel the presence of something greater, knew what it was like to trust even without seeing. But at that stage in her life, silence seemed to have become the only answer. She still tried. From time to time, some nights, her heart heavy, she would stare at the dark ceiling and whisper something she could barely hear. "Lord, are you still there?" But what always came back was the same emptiness. No answer, no sign, no emotion, and slowly, even those prayers began to fade. Because deep inside her, the thought grew that perhaps she was no longer being heard. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because there's a spiritual pain that has no name, but carries weight. It's the pain of continuing to believe, even when feeling alone. The pain of looking to the heavens and feeling no return. Of knowing that God exists, but feeling as if he were too distant, as if he'd turned his face away. Grace carried this feeling in her chest like a secret, not because she doubted God, but because she felt forgotten by him, and the cruelest part of it all was that she didn't tell anyone. How can you explain that you still believe, but you no longer feel anything? How can you confess that, even with faith, your soul feels empty? This was the conflict that consumed her. On the outside, she seemed strong. Inside, she lived in a screaming silence, and time only intensified this feeling. The more she prayed or tried to pray, the less she seemed to receive. The silence, once comfortable, became an abyss. That there are times when everything around us contributes to this kind of feeling. The losses, the delays, the no's, the doors that close, the dreams that don't come true. And the mind begins to tell a dangerous story. If he were really with me, why would all this be happening? It's a kind of internal narrative that destroys slowly, quietly, but with profound impact. And Grace was being hit every day by this narrative. She remembered ancient promises. She remembered moments when she felt God so close, when the signs were clear, when tears came from emotion, not pain. But that seemed so distant now, almost as if it had happened to someone else. And then she began to fall silent. Not out of anger, but out of exhaustion. Tired of crying out and not being heard, tired of waiting for answers that never came. And here's a hidden truth that few people talk about. Faith doesn't die all at once. It burns out slowly, like a forgotten candle. And that's what happened to Grace. She didn't stop believing, she just stopped feeling. And when faith loses its sensitivity, it enters a state of hibernation. It lies there, dormant, waiting for anything to awaken it again. In this state, she began to distance herself from everything that once connected her to the spiritual. She stopped reading, listening, and engaging, not out of rebellion, but because she felt like nothing was working. It was like being numb inside, as if the soul were protecting itself from yet another frustration. And this protection came in the form of distancing, silence, emotional indifference. But what she didn't know, and what she would only understand much later, is that, even in the silence, something was happening. God hadn't been silent. He was merely moving behind the scenes, and this is something many people need to hear. God's silence isn't absence. Often, it's preparation. It's quiet care. It's invisible construction. It's a response that hasn't yet reached the surface, but has already begun at the root. Grace would only understand this much later. For now, all she had was the echo of her questions and the absence of answers. The kind of phase that makes us question everything. That shakes our spiritual structure, our identity. And it was precisely at this point, in this suspension of certainties, that something began to change. It wasn't a vision. It wasn't a word. It was a strange sensation, as if the void were being watched. As if, behind that silence, there was a care she couldn't explain. And for the first time in a long time, she cried, but not from sadness. She cried because something inside her remembered. She remembered that there's a love that doesn't depend on feeling, a care that doesn't need immediate proof to exist, a kind of presence that doesn't disappear just because we stop looking. Grace didn't yet know what was coming, but something had changed, and sometimes all you need is that something to start over. Comment here. I'm not stopping here. And when something begins to change inside, even if no one sees it on the outside, the universe seems to pay attention. It's as if, the moment you allow yourself to feel again, something else approaches. That's what began to happen with Grace almost imperceptibly, like a light breeze that touches the soul and rekindles dormant memories. The presence wasn't yet clear, but she no longer felt so alone. And sometimes, that first step of remembering who you are spiritually begins to open doors that had been closed for a long time. Speaking of which, if all this we're talking about resonates with you, there's something special I've prepared with great care that can deepen this connection even further. It's a straightforward and practical resource called Reading Your Birth Angel. It was designed especially for those who feel they are in a moment of transformation and need clearer guidance, not just any guidance, but guidance that comes from the angelic kingdom in a personalized way. This content is right here in the description, and it can save you a lot of time and practice. Especially if you've ever felt a guiding presence but haven't yet grasped its meaning. If it resonates with you, check it out while it's still available. Honestly, I might take it down in the next few days, so it's best to take advantage of it while it's still available. Now, let me continue this story with you. She didn't know if she was praying or just thinking out loud, but at that particular moment, something inside her broke free. It wasn't a prayer full of beautiful words. There was no verse, no correct posture, no firm voice. It was just a broken whisper in the middle of the night. If anyone still hears me, get me out of here. It wasn't even planned. It just slipped out, a mix of outburst and surrender. The kind of phrase that comes not from the mind, but from a deeper place, where the last vestiges of hope reside. And the most curious thing, or perhaps the most sacred thing, is that sometimes it's only when we reach this point of total emptiness that something truly happens. Grace no longer had the strength to construct a beautiful prayer. There was no longer enough faith to believe that anything would change, but there was a spark, something fragile, almost extinguished, but real, a kind of supplication born not of fear, but of surrender. And surrender, however silent, always carries a different weight in the spiritual realm. Now I want to delve even deeper into this moment, because there's a subtle but powerful difference between asking for help and truly surrendering. When someone surrenders, they're no longer trying to control the process. They're no longer dictating how they should be helped. They simply open up. And that's what happened with Grace. She didn't lay down rules. She didn't ask for a specific sign. She didn't make a plan. She just blurted out a "save me" that might not have been audible, but felt. And there's something few people know about this kind of moment. It has an impact. In the physical world, it may seem like nothing. A sigh, a tear, a thought that comes and goes. But in the invisible world, this kind of cry moves forces the human mind cannot comprehend. Because it's not the volume of the voice that activates spiritual help, it's the depth of surrender. And Grace, even without knowing it, had accessed this sacred place. She lay down that night, expecting nothing. Perhaps she no longer remembered what she had said. The pain was so great that exhaustion took over. But something in the air felt different. Not in the room, in her. It was as if the weight of it all was still there, but not alone. It was as if there was a silent presence observing everything. Not with judgment, but with compassion. And that changes everything. When you feel seen of and at your worst, something inside starts to rearrange the pieces. It's not immediate, it's not visible, but it's real. Grace fell asleep in that state. Still broken, still empty, but with a different feeling. Something like, maybe I'm not completely alone here. That night, the heavens didn't open. No angel appeared at the foot of the bed. No light shone through the ceiling, but something changed. Because sometimes, miracles begin invisibly, in the silence, in the darkness, deep within. What happens next is merely a consequence. Because when the soul surrenders, the spiritual responds. And here comes something you may have felt too, that feeling of being heard even without speaking, that something pulling you up just as you were about to fall, that an invisible force surrounded you at the exact moment you surrendered. This isn't an illusion, it's not a coincidence, it's an answer, and it may have been the same answer Grace began receiving that morning. Interestingly, she didn't realize this right away. The following days remained challenging. The routine was still heavy. Sadness still haunted her. But there was a thread of something different swirling inside. A gentle presence. And a constant feeling that, something was about to happen. And it was, calm and I felt that too. The night was especially silent. It wasn't just an absence of noise, it was the kind of silence that seems to carry meaning. As if everything around her was waiting for something. Grace slept, but not soundly. Her body was exhausted, but her soul was restless. She tossed and turned, trying to find a position that would ease the internal weight that had been weighing her down for months. Until, around 3 a.m., something began to shift in the air. First came the temperature. That usual early morning chill seemed to have been replaced by a gentle warmth, but it didn't come from any blanket or any visible source. It was a warmth that seemed to touch the skin from within, a warmth that embraced, that filled without, suffocating. And then came the second sign, a light wind passing through the room. Even with the windows closed, the curtains swayed slowly, as if someone had just passed by. But there was no one there. Grace opened her eyes, her breathing quickening, trying to understand what was happening. It wasn't fear, it was something else. A mixture of surprise and a peace she hadn't felt in a long time. A peace that invaded without asking permission. And before she could even move, her eyes fixed on a specific corner of the room, the same corner where she had long ago knelt to pray. It was as if that spot were now subtly illuminated, a light that came neither from outside nor from within the house. It was as if the invisible had opened a crack, just for a few seconds. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there are moments when the spiritual touches the physical in an almost cinematic, yet real way. And when that happens, there's no way to pretend it was imagination. It's as if all the senses receive a silent alert that something extraordinary is present. And that's exactly what she felt. That space in the room seemed to pulse with an energy she didn't recognize with her mind, but which her soul identified as familiar. At that very moment, a sense of presence filled the room. It wasn't visible, but it was absolutely real. She felt as if someone were there. Not an ordinary person, not a person. Something higher, purer, lighter. The atmosphere seemed to breathe with her. And then came the third sign, the most subtle, but also the most striking, a voice. Not a loud sound, not an audible voice like a conversation, but a kind of thought that didn't seem to be hers. A thought that arrived as if it had penetrated layers of weariness and touched her heart. Get up. It was that simple. A single word, but it carried a power she hadn't heard in so long. It wasn't a command, it was a call. A breath of life embedded in a single word. Grace couldn't explain it, but she felt something inside her rise before her body even obeyed. As if her soul had been revived, as if the most dormant part of her had been gently shaken. It was as if heaven were saying, I'm still here. She sat up in bed slowly, her hands trembling. The room was still quiet, but the atmosphere had changed completely. It wasn't just the temperature, nor the air. It was the awareness that she wasn't alone. For the first time in a long time, Grace felt accompanied, not by a person, but by a presence. A spiritual intelligence that knew her completely. That knew what she carried within, yet remained there, unhurried, simply with her. And when she tried to think about whether it was real or not, she realized it didn't matter. What was happening wasn't for the mind to understand, it was for the soul to remember. To remember that there's something that knows us beyond words. That listens even to what we've never said. That answers before we even have the strength to ask. That night there was no thunder, no flashes of light. But there was something even more impactful. A silent visit, full of peace, filled with a love that didn't judge, only sustained. She didn't see wings. He didn't see a bright light, but he saw the impossible become real, a hope rekindled without logical explanation. And that's what changes everything. Because when the invisible touches the visible, reality is never the same again. Comment here. I feel the presence. Grace saw no wings, nor a luminous figure clearly outlined against the wall. There was no booming voice or blinding light streaming through the window. What she felt was something more subtle, an invisible presence that was nevertheless utterly real. A strength beyond words, a warmth that didn't come from the fire, a peace that didn't depend on silence. It was a deep, almost palpable sensation that seemed to envelop the entire space, filling every corner of the room with the kind of energy you couldn't see, but could feel. This manifestation didn't need a concrete form to make an impact. In fact, the lack of a clear image only heightened its mystery and fascination. What was that presence? Where did it come from? Was it the manifestation of an angel, a divine messenger, or perhaps something even more complex, beyond the human mind's grasp? These questions remain, because the spiritual doesn't always reveal itself in the way we expect. Sometimes it whispers, touches, lightly, appears disguised as silence, and it is precisely then that its power becomes truest and most unquestionable. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because in the invisible world, the impact of these small manifestations can be enormous. They are what transform a defeated mindset into one ready for change. These touches are what begin to pave the way for personal transformation, revealing the hidden depths of what we call a miracle, or divine intervention. Often, the truth hidden behind an angel isn't a grandiose apparition. but a gentle presence that comforts, sustains, and reminds the heart that it is never alone. It's as if something inside her had been touched by a force that requires no proof, only surrender. That invisible, though silent, presence carried such intense power that it altered Grace's emotional state, changing her frequency, the rhythm of her breathing, the pulse of her heart. The truth is that these manifestations, though difficult to describe, have an impact that extends far beyond the moment. They reconfigure decisions, alter beliefs, and awaken a new mindset ready to embrace the transformation that lies ahead. And it's precisely this sense of doubt, this ambiguity between the visible and the invisible, that makes everything so powerful, because it leaves room for belief, for hope, for the mystery that invites us to go beyond what meets the eye. This force, Grace felt, doesn't fit into science, doesn't fit into logical explanations, but it's the force that moves the soul when it no longer knows where to turn. She didn't need to see to believe, she just needed to feel. It was at this point that her journey began to take on new meaning. That invisible presence, which could have been an angel, an energy from the universe, or even a manifestation of divine love itself, was real enough to begin rebuilding what fear and pain had destroyed. It was the spark that lit the flame of transformation, the opening to a new mindset, the reconnection with a hidden truth that only the heart can understand. As she sat there in bed, still feeling that mysterious warmth and listening to the silent call, an inner movement began to take place. It wasn't visible to anyone looking in from the outside, but for Grace, it was the beginning of a turning point of profound impact that would alter the course of her life. A turning point that was unfolding behind the scenes of her reality. And the most impressive thing is that this presence didn't pressure her, didn't demand immediate answers, didn't dictate conditions. It simply existed there, constant, silent, strong. It was the assurance that, despite what she was experiencing, a greater force still walked beside her, even when all seemed lost. This ambiguity, this mystery, is what makes her story so human and yet so extraordinary. Because who has never felt something like it, an invisible presence in a moment of pain or doubt? Who has never experienced that silent comfort that comes not from words, but from something we know is there, even without seeing it? This is the essence of what many call angelic intervention, a touch that escapes reason but profoundly transforms the soul's journey. Right there, I'm on this journey too. Grace felt a change, so sudden and profound, she could hardly believe it. Lying in the darkness, her body heavy and her mind weary, something inside her awakened, an invisible force that seemed to support her, a silent embrace that filled her chest with a peace she hadn't felt in years. It was an instantaneous transformation, the kind that human logic can't explain, but the heart recognizes immediately. She didn't understand what had happened, she had no rational answers, but she didn't need to. In that moment, all that mattered was the feeling of rebirth, the certainty that a new energy was flowing within her, breathing life where before there had been only darkness. The tears began to flow, silently, unhurriedly, filled with a mixture of relief and surprise. It was as if, in that moment, a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders, a liberation that came not from words or promises, but from something deeper, more real and urgent. Grace couldn't say where that peace came from, but she knew it wasn't her own, that it was a gift given to her, an intervention beyond explanation by science or reason. It was a divine touch, a breath of what many call a miracle, and she was experiencing it there, on that silent night, without witnesses, without evidence beyond her own inner transformation. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic because this experience changes everything. When a transformation happens like this, without warning, without logic, it disarms doubts, breaks down internal barriers, and brings forth a new mindset. It's the kind of change that alters decisions, redefines priorities, and paves the way for a renewed journey, full of meaning and purpose. It's not just a moment of fleeting relief, but an impact that reverberates across all aspects of life, in future choices, in the way one sees the world and oneself. Grace, who once saw herself as someone on the brink of abandonment, became the protagonist of a powerful turning point, a silent turnaround, invisible to the eye, but evident in the transformation of her spirit. This moment reveals the behind-the-scenes nature of a divine intervention that often occurs away from the spotlight, in the darkest corners of life, where hope seems to have died, but where the true miracle begins. It is in this hidden space that the invisible force acts, silently, but with overwhelming impact. And the most fascinating thing is that this transformation didn't require Grace's unwavering faith or an explicit request. It was something that happened while she was still processing her own grief, a hidden truth that revealed itself just when all seemed lost. This is the essence of what many call an angelic presence, not a grandiose apparition, but a subtle and powerful intervention that rebuilds the soul and reignites the flame of hope. It's an invitation to open the eyes of the heart, to realize that, even when logic insists there's no way out, there's a greater force at work behind the scenes of our existence. On the silence of that night, as peace washed over her, Grace realized she was facing something greater than her own understanding. Sign, a call to allow herself to live a new story. This experience, though only a moment, carried the weight of a definitive change, a transformation that would not be merely fleeting but would forever shape her journey. And it is precisely this moment, this passage between the old and the new, that leaves an indelible mark on the hearts of those who experience something like this. A mark that never fades, that persists as a living reminder that the invisible can become tangible, and that divine intervention can happen even in the darkest hours. This instantaneous transformation opens doors to the unexpected, to that which transcends reason and touches the soul. Comment. This message was for me. After that night when everything changed, Grace didn't suddenly transform into a completely different person, nor did her life resolve itself in the blink of an eye. The transformation she experienced had a profound impact, yes, but also a silent one that revealed itself gradually, at the pace of a journey that only time can shape. The days that followed were filled with small internal battles, doubts that still persisted, but also a renewed desire to live. It was as if a seed had been planted in her heart, a seed that, despite the difficulties, began to sprout, insistent, with the power of true transformations that change everything from within. Grace found a sacred space in prayer again, an intimate conversation she had abandoned long ago. Not as an obligation, but as a refuge. A moment to connect with the peace she had felt on that mysterious night. And slowly, things began to change, not miraculously and immediately, as in fairy tales, but in everyday life, in the small details that carry greater meaning than they seem. The decisions she made were no longer driven by fear or hopelessness, but by a renewed mindset, clearer and more open to what the future might bring. The process was eye-opening because it showed that miracles don't always have to be instantaneous to be real. Sometimes, true change happens through progression, through daily learning, through the gradual healing of invisible wounds, through the courage to continue even when everything seems uncertain. This is the beauty of transformations that come from the invisible, from forces acting behind the scenes of our lives, where time becomes an ally of renewal, not an enemy. It's an invitation to see the journey as a path of evolution, where every step matters, where each small victory has a powerful impact that strengthens the spirit. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic because understanding this progression is crucial to not giving up when changes seem slow. Often, the feeling that nothing is happening makes us question, and this doubt can be the biggest barrier to continuing. But it is in this gradual, almost imperceptible movement that the true power of transformation lies. Grace learned to recognize the signs, to realize that every gesture, every thought, every silent prayer was part of a larger process of preparation for what was yet to come. This period was also crucial in shifting her mindset, helping her understand that the real impact lies not in the speed of the response, but in the depth of the inner change. She began to make more conscious decisions, to look at herself with more compassion, to value the small daily miracles that had previously gone unnoticed. This shift in perspective was what allowed the hidden truth behind that supernatural experience to manifest concretely in her life, and it wasn't just internal changes that marked those days. Gradually, Grace realized that her return to prayer and faith had a ripple effect in her relationships, in the way she faced challenges, even in the opportunities that began to appear. Everything seemed to align with the new energy she carried, a reflection of the impact of the transformation she had experienced. This shows how one's journey can influence not only oneself but the entire environment around them, creating a contagious cycle of renewal and hope. This story reveals one of the greatest lessons about the power of spiritual and emotional change. It doesn't have to be spectacular to be real, but it does have to be deep and genuine. Progressive transformation is often the most lasting because it builds strong roots that withstand life's storms. And it's precisely this strength that Grace found within herself, a quiet power that sustained her when the world seemed to be falling apart. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic because understanding how to recognize and cultivate this inner strength is an essential step in any transformational journey. We often get lost in the anxiety of seeing quick results and forget to value the processes that happen silently, away from the spotlight. This mindset shift can be the turning point between giving up halfway and staying strong until the final breakthrough. Grace not only discovered a new way of living, but also a new way of relating to the invisible, to what cannot be seen but can be felt, to the forces that act behind the scenes of existence. This awakening brought a clarity that few can explain in words, but that anyone can recognize when they experience it. It's a revelation that profoundly impacts the journey, transforming the way we make decisions and face the challenges that lie ahead. Comment. I'm on this journey too. After everything she had experienced that intense night, Grace still carried a feeling difficult to explain, a peace that seemed to belong to no other world, a comfort that came not from circumstances but from something greater. She began to notice small coincidences, details that, at first glance, might seem like mere coincidences, but which, for those open to perceive, are revelations of the hidden depths of life. of the invisible connections that span time and space. It was then that Grace heard, almost like a whisper in the wind, accounts of people who, at that very moment, were praying for her, silently interceding, offering their faith and energy so that this transformation could happen. Just imagine the power that exists when someone's prayers, even from a distance, align with the exact moment of an internal shift. This synchronicity between the visible and invisible worlds has an impact that goes far beyond what we can rationally understand. It's a hidden truth that manifests itself between the lines of life, in the coincidences that light the way when we're lost. Grace wasn't alone, though she felt silence and abandonment. There was an invisible network of protection and care that surrounded her, even when it seemed no one was looking. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic because it is precisely this spiritual connection, this intertwining of prayers, dreams, and strengths that sustain us in the most difficult times, which often goes unnoticed. The mentality of isolation, that we are alone in our pain, is one of the greatest traps that blocks the flow of transformation. But when we recognize that there is a universe of people, energies, and even angels working behind the scenes, everything takes on a new dimension, a silent hope that can change the internal game, and with it, the external reality as well. It's not uncommon for others to come forward after an experience like Grace's to say that same night they had strange dreams or visions of angelic figures, or felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to pray for someone they didn't even know. This reveals how much one person's journey can be intertwined with the journeys of many, demonstrating that the impact of our decisions and changes extends far beyond what we can see. This idea reinforces a profound transformation in our perception of the world, an awakening to the hidden truth that exists between the lines of reality. For Grace, discovering she wasn't alone represented a turning point, a confirmation that the divine forces she'd felt that night weren't mere coincidences, but real manifestations of care and presence. This revelation opened the door for her to allow herself to believe again, for hope to begin to be nourished not just by wishes, but by a certainty born of experiences lived in silence and faith. It is in this connection that lies the power to continue, even when the path still seems uncertain. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic because understanding the spiritual network that surrounds us helps shift the mindset from isolation to one of community and belonging. This shift has a decisive impact on personal transformation, because when we recognize ourselves as part of something greater, our decisions become more aligned with the truth we hold in our hearts. This connection between worlds, between the visible and the invisible, also invites us to open our eyes to the signs that are often subtle but carry profound meaning for our journey. Grace, realizing that so many prayers and care were intertwined in that moment, felt her heart open to a new reality that we are not alone in our challenges, even when everything seems to conspire against hope. This revelation can be a beacon for those who live in the silence of their own struggle, proof that, even in apparent solitude, there is a greater force at work, an invisible impact that brings about essential transformations. Comment there, I feel the presence. If you've ever felt like Grace, lost amidst the silence that seems to swallow everything, carrying that weight no one sees, know that this is not the end of your story. The hidden truth, the one few can see, is that even when everything seems to fall apart, even when silence seems to be the only sound around you, angels are still at work, not in the ways we expect, not always with obvious signs, but in the subtlety of an invisible touch, in the silent care that surrounds us in our darkest hours. This is a powerful revelation that many ignore. Heaven is moving, even when we don't see it. Transformation is happening behind the scenes, between the lines of our lives, in those small decisions that no one notices, but which set the stage for the great impact that is yet to come. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because understanding this invisible action completely changes our mindset. When we believe we're alone, when we give up or allow doubt to take over, we fail to perceive the movement of the spiritual universe working on our behalf. The journey of transformation, healing, and rediscovery of peace doesn't always happen with flashes of light, but through gradual processes, in details that go unnoticed, in almost imperceptible signs that, if you open your heart, you'll be able to feel. It's a change that begins within, a reprogramming of the soul that reverberates in real life, in relationships, in decisions, in opportunities that arise at the right time. This experience invites us to abandon the urgency of immediacy and embrace the beauty of patience, because not every miracle is instantaneous, some are progressive. A process that demands faith and courage to continue, even when the results are not visible on the surface. It is a shift in mindset, a transformation that aligns us with a higher frequency, where the true behind the scenes of our destiny are gradually revealed. Understanding this is an invitation to expand our vision, to realize that, although the path is full of challenges, the presence that sustains us is real and constant. Furthermore, this story is an invitation for you to recognize the power of your own journey. Every moment of pain, silence, and even doubt are fundamental pieces that make up the mosaic of your personal transformation. Nothing is in vain. not even that which seems lost or forgotten. This connection with the invisible, with the angelic realm, is not a privilege of the few. It is a resource available to all who have the courage to seek beyond what the eyes can see, knowing that there is a hand extended even when we cannot see it, that there is a light that shines in the darkness, changes the impact of our journey. We begin to walk with greater hope, more courage, and, above all, more faith. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because bringing this message to the present opens a door for each person to realize that the decisions made from this new awareness will redefine their destiny. Transformation isn't just in the moment something happens, but in how we allow it to shape us, to change our minds and hearts. This revelation empowers us to take control of our story, knowing that we are not alone, and that, even in apparent solitude, the impact of divine care is present. God's grace is a mirror for many who watch this story, an invitation to see that the invisible is working on our behalf, and that, although God's silence may seem like an absence, it is actually a subtle movement that prepares the ground for something greater. This is the hidden force you can begin to recognize and use as a foundation for your own decisions. To reprogram your mind and make room for true transformation. Comment there. That makes sense to me. When we think of miracles, our minds often reduce them to fairy tales, those magical scenes we see in movies or read about in books. But the profound truth is that miracles are spiritual realities, events that transcend logic and common understanding, manifesting precisely where human reason bows before the inexplicable. And the most impressive thing is that these miracles don't depend on grand spectacles or visible applause. They happen silently, deep within the heart, at the moment when hope seemed exhausted, in the invisible turning point that transforms everything from the inside out. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because it is precisely when a person no longer believes, when their strength seems to have vanished, that the power of the angels manifests itself most intensely. It's as if the universe conspires in favor of those who have completely surrendered, who no longer have the strength to fight alone. Paradoxically, it is at this point of surrender that a direct channel opens for the supernatural to act. These invisible beings, so often mentioned in ancient traditions and so often forgotten, step in to bring comfort, healing, and guidance where logic and science cannot reach. They operate on the frequency of faith, moving between spaces the mind cannot grasp but which the spirit clearly recognizes. When we look at Grace's story, we don't just see a woman who overcame hardships. We see the reflection of a universal truth. The journey of spiritual transformation is marked by moments of profound fragility, but also by a silent awakening that redefines the meaning of the impossible. The impact of this change goes far beyond what meets the eye, touching hidden layers of the soul and revealing that the backstage of life is governed by forces far beyond our immediate control. These revelations show us that miracles are not isolated events or exceptions, but an essential part of the invisible fabric that sustains existence. This understanding brings a new mindset, an invitation for every decision, no matter how simple it may seem, to be made with awareness of the spiritual realm that surrounds us. The hidden truth invites us to recognize that we are part of a much larger network, where every action resonates and where the touch of an angel can be the turning point you've been waiting for. What's more, even when external reality seems to contradict all this, the invisible work continues, affecting lives in ways only the heart can perceive. It is this connection that gives meaning to the journey, that transforms suffering into learning and doubt into faith. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic because understanding this dynamic can change not only the way you see the world, but also the way you relate to your own challenges. When we recognize that the invisible acts in the intimacy of our being, we learn to value every moment of waiting, every silence, and every small victory, no matter how small it may seem. This perspective brings an inner peace that doesn't depend on circumstances and renewed courage to face the battles of everyday life. After all, what lies beyond logic is precisely what sustains miracles, a subtle yet powerful force that invites us to trust even when everything indicates otherwise. Therefore, the story we share is not just an isolated testimony, but an invitation for you to also recognize this presence all around you, so that you know that no matter how difficult your situation seems, there is a greater plan at work, a transformation happening behind the scenes in your life. This certainty changes the impact of what we face, bringing real, tangible hope. And even if this truth still seems unknown, simply opening your heart to this possibility is already a powerful step toward the change you desire. Comment: this message was for me. Have you ever stopped to think about how our experiences, even the most silent and intimate, have the power to transform our entire worldview? Sometimes, what seems like just a small moment, a fraction of a moment in which we feel something different, is actually the beginning of a profound and intense journey of change. When Grace lived that experience, she didn't have all the answers. She couldn't explain what happened, but something inside her began to pulse differently, a force that propelled her forward, even without guarantees, even without certainty of what would come. This kind of transformation isn't linear. It doesn't follow a predictable logic. and that's precisely where the true power of the miracle lies. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because understanding how this subtle but impactful shift affects the mind and spirit can be a game changer in how you face your own challenges. True transformation often begins with an almost invisible decision, an internal choice made without realizing it. It's a reprogramming of the mindset, a breaking of old paradigms that were limiting your ability to see possibilities. And this reprogramming comes with an impact that goes beyond the emotional. It changes how you approach life, your decisions, and the journey you're on. This process, though silent, brings powerful revelations about what appears to be happening only on the physical plane. It's as if a hidden truth is being unveiled, showing that not everything depends on external circumstances, but on an internal connection to something greater. This is where faith, hope, and surrender intertwine to form the basis of this transformation. And the most curious thing is that, often, this change begins at the moment when a person feels most fragile, when doors seem closed and the path dark. It is precisely at this moment that the invisible light begins to manifest, albeit almost imperceptibly. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic so you can understand that the journey of transformation isn't just about receiving immediate answers or spectacular miracles. It's about recognizing the gradual movement that occurs within you, shaping a new being, a new mindset capable of navigating complex situations with greater serenity and clarity. It's an invitation for you to look at your own history and identify those small moments you may have missed, those signs, those little sparks that, together, form a fire that warms the soul and guides the way. The beauty of this journey lies in the impact it has not only on you, but on everything around you. Each step taken with faith and awareness will be reflected in more aligned decisions, in truer connections, in a life that begins to pulse, in tune with the hidden truth that exists within us all. Transformation is, therefore, a process that involves both mind and spirit, where internal renewal creates a solid foundation for what is to come. And this foundation is what sustains miracles, whether instantaneous or progressive, because it prepares the ground for the impossible to become possible. You don't need to understand everything now, and perhaps you won't even need to fully understand it someday. The essential thing is to allow yourself to feel this movement, this change that is happening, even if it still seems subtle or disconnected from what you expect. Accepting this uncertainty is part of the transformation, because it is there that the opportunity for the greatest revelations lies. It's the moment when you recognize that you are not alone, that there are invisible forces working for your good, even when everything seems to say otherwise. Comment there. That makes sense to me. Getting this far already shows how much this story touched something deep inside you, and that's a real connection we've built together. If you felt this content shed some light or opened a new door to understanding your own journey, stay with me for a moment. Leave a comment with the phrase, "I'm with you until the end." That way, I know we're walking side by side in this search for transformation and meaning. This exchange is what keeps this energy of support and growth alive, which goes far beyond any screen. And since we're talking about walking together, please take the opportunity to like the video, because this simple gesture is a way of saying that what we share here resonates with you, that it helps build this network of inspiration we want to expand. It's not about numbers. It's about recognizing the value of what happens in this exchange, and your participation makes all the difference in helping me continue to bring you more content that truly touches your heart. There's a video right here that elaborates on this topic, bringing new perspectives and revelations that will help you delve even deeper into this transformation. Click there and stay with me there, because the journey we've begun here still has much to reveal, and I want you to be a part of every step. The journey is long, but it's by walking together that we find the strength to keep going. So, once again, leave a comment saying I'm with you until the end, and let's stay connected on this mission of growth, understanding, and faith. See you soon, in the next video.